My name is Jonathan, and 5 years ago, I disappeared. I vanished from their lives without a trace. But for you to understand why I made such a drastic decision, I need to take you back to the day my entire world fell apart. I lived what I thought was a normal life. I worked hard on projects for local companies, often coming home late at night to my wife, Emily, and our 2 children, Michael and Madison. They were my everything, my reason for working tirelessly, my source of joy and purpose. Emily and I had been married for nearly 2 decades. She was the love of my life, or so I thought. Our marriage wasn't perfect, but whose is? We had our ups and downs, sure, but I always believed we were in it together. That belief gave me comfort. It made all the late nights and the endless grind worth it. Then came the day that shattered everything. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon, and I'd taken the day off to surprise Emily. I'd planned a romantic dinner for the 2 of us. I thought we could reconnect, away from the daily stresses of life. As I stepped into the house, I immediately noticed something was off. The air felt heavy, and the usually welcoming silence of our home seemed tense. I walked towards the kitchen, expecting to see Emily prepping something for dinner or chatting with a friend on the phone. Instead, I heard her voice coming from the living room. Her tone was hushed, almost conspiratorial. At first, I thought she was just talking to someone about mundane things, but then I caught a few words that made my stomach churn. "He can never find out. It would ruin everything," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I froze in place, my heart racing. What was she talking about? Who was she speaking to? Curiosity, or maybe dread, got the better of me. I moved closer, careful not to make a sound. And that's when I heard the words that would haunt me forever. The twins, they aren't his. He's been living a lie all these years, and if he finds out, I don't know what he'll do. I felt the air leave my lungs. My vision blurred as my mind struggled to process what I had just heard. The twins, Michael and Madison, weren't mine? How could that be? They were my children. I had raised them, loved them, sacrificed for them. The thought that they might not be mine was like a knife to the heart. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. But there was no mistaking the seriousness in her voice, the way she spoke as though this was some dark secret she had been hiding for years. Before I could make sense of it, I heard her say something else that sent me over the edge. "Jack has always been the real father. It's better for everyone if Jonathan never knows." Jack, my brother. The walls of my life crumbled around me in that moment. The betrayal was too much to bear. I didn't confront her. I didn't say a word. I just turned around, walked out the door, and kept walking. That was the day I ceased to exist in their lives. I left the house that day with no plan, no destination, just the overwhelming need to get as far away as possible. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, pain, and disbelief. The betrayal wasn't just Emily's. It was Jack's too. My own brother. The thought of him, someone I'd trusted my entire life, crossing a line like that shattered me. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying her words over and over in my head. The twins, they aren't his. How long had she been lying? How could she look me in the eyes every day and pretend? Every memory we shared felt tainted. Every happy moment now seemed like a cruel joke. Eventually, I ended up at a motel on the outskirts of town. It was a dingy place, the kind you'd only stay in if you had nowhere else to go. And that's exactly how I felt. I checked in under a fake name and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, my mind racing. I wanted answers, but I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed proof, something concrete to confirm what I had overheard. So, over the next few days, I quietly started digging. I called in favors from friends in town, people who owed me for jobs I'd done over the years. I needed to know how long this had been going on, how deep the betrayal went. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Jack and Emily had been seeing each other behind my back for over a decade. It started not long after Madison and Michael were born. As I pieced everything together, the timeline became clear. They had built their secret life right under my nose, while I worked overtime to provide for the family I thought was mine. The betrayal was deeper than I could have imagined. Not only had Jack fathered the twins, but he had also been financially supporting Emily behind the scenes. All those times I wondered why she never seemed stressed about money. Jack was the reason. I felt like a fool, blinded by love, by trust, by the belief that my family was unbreakable. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how carefully they had orchestrated this double life. But the final blow came when I found a document Emily had hidden. It was a legal agreement, a transfer of assets from my name to hers. The house, the savings, everything I had worked so hard for, was in the process of being taken away from me. The paper wasn't signed, but it was clear what her intentions were. She and Jack were planning to cut me out entirely. That was the breaking point. I couldn't let them destroy me completely. I packed a bag with just the essentials and left town. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my friends, not my colleagues, no one. I disappeared into the night, leaving behind the life I had built and the people who had betrayed me. For months, I moved from place to place, staying under the radar. I found odd jobs to keep myself afloat, construction work, maintenance, anything that paid cash. I wanted no trace of myself left behind, no breadcrumbs for Emily or Jack to follow. At first, I thought I'd feel free, like I was finally escaping the weight of their lies. But the reality was far more complicated. Every quiet moment was filled with memories I couldn't escape. The laughter of the twins, the warmth of family dinners, the way Emily used to hold my hand. All of it felt like a distant, painful dream. The hardest part was knowing that Michael and Madison weren't to blame. They were innocent in all of this. But the thought of seeing their faces, knowing they weren't mine, was too much to bear. It wasn't their fault, but it didn't change the fact that I couldn't be a part of their lives anymore. I spent the next 5 years trying to rebuild myself. Slowly, I began to heal, though the scars of betrayal remained. I changed my name, moved to a small town far from where it all began, and started over. It wasn't easy, but I found a semblance of peace in the quiet, isolated life I had created. Then, out of nowhere, everything came crashing back. It started with an email, one I almost ignored. The subject line read, "Dad, we need your help." I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. It was from Madison. She had found me. I must have stared at that email for an hour, my mind spinning with questions. How had she found me? Why was she reaching out after all this time? And most importantly, why now? My heart was pounding as I clicked on the message. "Dad, it's Madison. I know it's been years, but we really need your help. Things have been hard since you left. Michael and I are in college now, and we're struggling to make ends meet. Mom isn't able to support us like she used to, and we don't know where else to turn. We've tried everything, but we're out of options. Please, if you can, we just need some help to get through this. I know you probably hate us, but I had to try. Madison." I leaned back in my chair, the words cutting through me like a knife. Hate them? No, I didn't hate them. I hated what their mother and Jack had done, but the kids were never to blame. Still, reading her plea stirred up emotions I'd buried long ago. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to close my laptop and pretend I'd never seen it, but I couldn't. The image of Madison and Michael, older now, struggling, stuck in my mind. As much as I tried to separate myself from them over the years, some part of me still cared. I hesitated for a long time before replying. My response was short, detached. "Madison, I got your message. I need some time to think about this. Let me know what exactly you need. Jonathan." I didn't call myself Dad. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Her reply came almost instantly. "Thank you for answering. I wasn't sure if you even got the email. Michael and I need help paying for tuition and rent. Mom can't keep up with the bills, and we're falling behind. We're desperate, Dad. Please, anything you can do would mean the world to us." Desperate. That word echoed in my mind. It didn't sit right with me. Emily had Jack. Surely, he was still in the picture, still supporting her. Why would they be struggling? Something wasn't adding up. Against my better judgment, I decided to dig deeper. I reached out to an old friend who still lived in town, someone who might know what was going on. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but he owed me a favor. The information he gave me left me reeling. Emily and Jack were no longer together. Apparently, Jack had left her 2 years ago, taking most of his money with him. Emily was left to fend for herself, and without his support, she was drowning in debt. She'd sold the house, downsized to a small apartment, and had been struggling to make ends meet ever since. My friend also mentioned something else, something that made my blood boil. "Jonathan," he said, "you're not going to like this, but you need to know. Emily's been telling people you abandoned her and the kids with no warning, no explanation. She's made you out to be the bad guy. Everyone in town thinks you're the villain in this story." I clenched my fists, the anger bubbling up inside me. After everything she'd done, she was playing the victim, spinning a story to make herself look innocent while I took the blame. But what stung the most was the realization that Madison and Michael might believe it too. For 5 years, they probably thought I had abandoned them, that I didn't care. They had no idea about the lies, the betrayal, the real reason I left. For the first time in years, I felt the pull to confront the past. Not for Emily or Jack, but for the kids. They deserved to know the truth. I decided to reply to Madison, but this time, I asked for more details. I needed to hear it from her directly. "Madison, I'm sorry you're going through this. Can you tell me more about what's been happening? What's going on with your mom? How are you and Michael managing? I need to understand the full picture before I can decide what to do." "Jonathan." Her response came the next day, and it was heartbreaking. "Dad, Mom's been working multiple jobs, but it's not enough. She doesn't like to talk about it, but I know she's been struggling ever since Uncle Jack left. Michael and I are doing what we can, but we can't cover everything. We just need help until we can get on our feet. Please, Dad, I know you're angry with Mom, but don't punish us for her mistakes." I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to untangle. Angry? Yes, I was angry, but not at them. And the thought of helping them, knowing where the money might go, it felt like walking into a trap. Still, they were reaching out to me. They were desperate. I couldn't ignore that. I needed to make a decision. Madison's words stayed with me for days. Don't punish us for her mistakes. She was right. They weren't to blame. But the thought of stepping back into that world, of opening old wounds, made me feel sick. I had spent 5 years trying to rebuild myself, to forget everything Emily and Jack had done to me. Was I really ready to face it all again? I decided to get more information before making any decisions. I needed to see what their situation was really like, not just through Madison's desperate words. So, I reached out to my friend in town again and asked him to check in on Emily and the kids. A week later, he called me back. "Jonathan," he said cautiously, "it's not good. Emily's working 2 part-time jobs, but it's barely enough to keep a roof over their heads. The kids are doing okay in school, but they're clearly struggling. Michael's taken up a job at a local cafe, and Madison tutors high school students on the side, but even that's not enough to cover tuition. They're living in a cramped apartment in a rough part of town. It's not the life they used to have, that's for sure." Hearing that stung more than I expected. I didn't want to care about Emily's struggles, not after what she'd done, but it was hard not to think about the kids. They were living a life I never would have wanted for them. Still, something wasn't adding up. If Jack had left her 2 years ago, where had all the money gone? He'd been supporting them for years. Surely Emily should have had something saved. I asked my friend to look into it, and what he found left me reeling. It turned out that Jack had drained most of his accounts before leaving town. Not only had he cut ties with Emily, but he'd also abandoned her financially. The house had been sold to pay off debts Jack had racked up, and Emily had been left with almost nothing. For a brief moment, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. Jack, the man who had stolen everything from me, had done the same to her. But that satisfaction quickly faded. The kids were the collateral damage in all of this, and they didn't deserve it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't ignore them. I wasn't ready to forgive Emily, but Michael and Madison deserved a chance. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to meet them. I didn't want Emily to know I was coming. This wasn't about her. It was about the kids. I arranged to meet Madison and Michael at a diner near their college. The night before, I barely slept. I kept wondering how they would react when they saw me. Would they be angry? Hurt? Would they even want to see me? When I arrived at the diner, my hands were trembling. I spotted them immediately, sitting at a corner booth. Madison looked so much older than I remembered. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she had dark circles under her eyes. Michael sat across from her, fidgeting with his phone. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. Then Madison looked up and saw me. Her eyes widened, and she nudged Michael, who turned to look as well. "Dad?" Madison said softly, her voice trembling. I nodded and walked over to the table. "Hi," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Madison stood up and hugged me. I wasn't prepared for the rush of emotions that hit me as I held her. It felt like no time had passed, and yet everything was different. Michael stood up next, hesitating before giving me a quick, awkward hug. We sat down, and for a few moments, no one said anything. Then Madison broke the silence. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I wasn't sure if I should," I admitted. "But I needed to see you. Both of you." Michael looked down at the table, his jaw tight. "Why did you leave?" he asked, his voice low. "Why did you just disappear?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I had rehearsed this moment in my head, but now that it was here, I didn't know what to say. I left because I paused, trying to find the right words. Because I found out something that I couldn't handle. Something that broke me. Madison's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment I had to tell them the truth. "I overheard your mother talking to someone," I said carefully. She said that you two aren't mine. That Jack is your real father." Madison's face went pale, and Michael's eyes widened. "What?" Madison whispered, shaking her head. "That's not true. It can't be true." "I wish it wasn't," I said, my voice cracking. But I heard it with my own ears. And when I started digging, I found proof. Your mother and Jack had been involved for years. And Jack, he's your biological father. Michael slammed his hand on the table, his face twisted with anger. "She lied to us. She lied to everyone." Madison looked like she was about to cry. "Why didn't you tell us sooner? Why did you just leave?" "I didn't know how," I said. "I didn't want to hurt you. And honestly, I didn't know how to face you after finding out. I thought it would be easier if I just disappeared." Madison wiped her eyes and took a deep breath. "So what happens now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm here now, and I want to help you, if you'll let me." For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. But I also knew this was just the beginning. Madison and Michael sat in silence, processing everything I had just told them. The diner felt unbearably quiet despite the clinking of dishes and the murmur of other conversations around us. I could see the conflict in their faces, shock, betrayal, and confusion all battling for dominance. Madison was the first to speak. Her voice trembled as she asked, "Why didn't Mom ever tell us? Did she think we'd never find out?" "I don't know," I admitted, leaning forward. "But what I do know is that she's been hiding this for a long time. I overheard her talking about it years ago, and when I looked into it, everything pointed to the same truth. I thought it was best to walk away. I didn't want to tear your lives apart." Michael stared at the table, his jaw clenched. "Well, congratulations," he said bitterly. "Our lives are torn apart now." His words stung, but I couldn't blame him. They had every right to be angry. At their mother, at me, at the situation as a whole. Madison, however, seemed more introspective. She looked at me with tears brimming in her eyes and said, "So, you knew all this time and just left us? Do you know how much it hurt to think you abandoned us? That you didn't care?" "I cared," I said, my voice cracking. "I cared more than you can imagine. Leaving wasn't about not caring, it was about survival. I didn't know how to cope with what I'd discovered, and I thought you'd be better off without me." Madison shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "You were wrong. We needed you. We still need you." Her words hit me like a freight train. I had spent so long convincing myself that disappearing was the right thing to do. But now, hearing her say those words, I realized just how deeply I had failed them. "What about Mom?" Michael asked suddenly, his tone sharp. Does she know you're back? What's she going to say when she finds out you told us? I haven't spoken to her, I replied. And honestly, I don't care what she thinks. This is about you too, not her. You deserve the truth. Michael laughed bitterly. The truth? The truth is that our whole lives have been a lie. Everything we thought we knew, everything we believed, was fake. Madison reached out and touched his arm. Michael, stop. This isn't Dad's fault. Isn't it? He snapped, glaring at me. He walked away and left us to deal with all of this alone. Mom lied to us, sure, but he didn't even try to fight for us. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I thought I was doing the right thing, but I knew he was right. I had failed them, just as much as Emily had, albeit in a different way. I'm sorry, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I can't change what I did, but I'm here now, and I want to make things right, if you'll let me. Madison sighed, rubbing her temples. We can't deal with all of this right now. It's too much. Can we take some time to process? Of course, I said immediately. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. She nodded, her expression a mix of exhaustion and relief. Michael, however, still looked skeptical. Don't make promises you can't keep, he said coldly before standing up. I need some air. He walked out of the diner, leaving Madison and me sitting there in an awkward silence. I'm sorry he's angry, Madison said softly. He's hurt. We both are. I understand, I replied. And I don't blame him. This is a lot to take in. Madison hesitated before asking, Do you still think of us as your kids? Even after everything? Her question broke my heart. Of course I do, I said without hesitation. You'll always be my kids, no matter what. Biology doesn't change that. Her lip quivered, and she nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered. We sat there for a while longer, talking about everything and nothing. I could see the pain in her eyes, but I could also see a glimmer of hope, a chance to rebuild what had been broken. As we left the diner, I knew this was just the beginning. There was still so much to unravel, so many wounds to heal. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally moving in the right direction. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to run anymore. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart. The conversation at the diner had left me drained, but it also lit a fire inside me. Madison's words echoed in my mind. We still need you. It wasn't just about rebuilding my relationship with them. It was about facing the past I had tried so hard to leave behind. I decided I couldn't move forward without confronting Emily. I needed to hear her side of the story, not for forgiveness, but for closure. Madison and Michael deserved clarity, and I couldn't give them that without addressing the person who had caused all this pain. I texted Madison to let her know my plan. Her reply came almost immediately. Be careful. She's not the same person you remember. That warning stuck with me as I drove to the apartment my friend had told me about. It was a far cry from the home we'd once shared. The neighborhood was run down, the kind of place where every other house had a for sale sign or boarded up windows. I parked outside and sat in the car for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Finally, I stepped out, walked up the cracked concrete path, and knocked on the door. It took a few moments, but eventually Emily opened it. Her face froze when she saw me, her expression a mixture of shock and something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Jonathan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here? We need to talk, I said firmly, stepping past her into the small, cluttered living room. It smelled faintly of mildew, and the furniture looked like it had seen better days. She closed the door behind me, her movements hesitant. She gestured toward the couch. You can sit if you want. I stayed standing. I'm not here to catch up, Emily. I'm here for answers. Madison and Michael know the truth now. I told them. Her face went pale. You what? I told them everything, I said, my voice steady. That Jack is their biological father. That you and he were together for years behind my back. They deserve to know. Emily sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. You had no right, she murmured. No right? I snapped. You've been lying to them their entire lives, Emily. You've been lying to me. I had every right to tell them the truth. She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. You don't understand what it was like. I was stuck in a marriage where I felt invisible. He was there for me in ways you never were. Her words hit like a slap, but I refused to let her twist this around. Don't you dare blame this on me, I said coldly. I worked my ass off to provide for this family. I sacrificed everything for you and the kids. And while I was out there breaking my back, you were building a life with my brother. She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she sighed and leaned back against the couch. You don't know what it was like after you left, she said quietly. Jack abandoned us too. He took everything and left me with nothing. I've been trying to hold things together ever since. And what about the kids? I asked. Do they even know how much you've lied to them? How you've made me out to be the villain all these years? She didn't answer right away. Her silence spoke volumes. They think I abandoned them, I continued, my voice rising. They think I didn't care enough to stay. That's the story you told them, isn't it? Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. I didn't know what else to say, she whispered. I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I look them in the eye and admit what I'd done? You should have thought about that before you started this mess, I said coldly. You destroyed everything, Emily. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed them too. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything hung heavy in the air. Finally, she broke the silence. So, what happens now? She asked, her voice trembling. That's up to them, I said. I'm here for Madison and Michael, not for you. I don't owe you anything. She nodded, her shoulders slumping. I want them to be okay. Then start by being honest with them, I said. They deserve the truth, from you, this time. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, she called out, Jonathan. I paused, looking back at her. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible. For everything. I didn't respond. Sorry wouldn't undo the years of pain she had caused. I walked out the door, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Confronting Emily was a step forward, but it didn't erase the scars she had left behind. My focus now was on Madison and Michael. They were the only reason I had come back, and I was determined to be the father they needed, no matter how complicated things got. The drive back from Emily's apartment felt longer than it actually was. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, anger, regret, and a faint sense of relief. Confronting her had been necessary, but it didn't make the pain any less real. As much as I hated what she'd done, part of me couldn't help but pity her. She had built her life on lies, and now those lies had come back to destroy her. But I couldn't let myself get lost in those thoughts. My focus had to remain on Madison and Michael. They were the only ones who mattered now. I decided to meet Madison first. I texted her to let her know I was nearby, and she agreed to meet me at a small park near her campus. When I arrived, she was sitting on a bench under a tree, her head bowed as she scrolled through her phone. When she saw me, she gave a small, hesitant smile. Hey, she said softly. Hey, I replied, sitting down beside her. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, watching a group of kids play on the swings nearby. Finally, Madison spoke. How did it go with Mom? She asked, her voice careful. It went as well as it could, I guess, I said. She admitted everything. She said she's sorry, but I don't know. It doesn't change what happened. Madison nodded, biting her lip. I don't know what to think anymore. I feel like my whole life has been a lie. It's okay to feel that way, I said. You've been through a lot, more than anyone your age should have to deal with. But you're strong, Madison. I see it in you. She looked at me, her eyes glistening with tears. I just don't understand why she lied to us for so long. Did she think we wouldn't find out? Or did she just not care? I think she was scared, I said. Scared of losing you. Scared of facing the truth. But that doesn't make it right. You deserved better. Madison wiped her eyes and nodded. What about you? Are you going to stick around this time? Yes, I said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. I know I've let you down before, but I'm here now, and I'm going to do everything I can to make it right. Her lip quivered, and she leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. I missed you, Dad, she whispered. I missed you too, I said, my voice thick with emotion. We sat there for a while, the weight of the past starting to lift ever so slightly. Later that evening, I met Michael. He was less open than Madison, his anger still fresh and raw. We met at a coffee shop near his part-time job, and from the moment he sat down, his body language was tense. Arms crossed, shoulders stiff. I'm only here because Madison told me I should hear you out, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. That's fair, I said. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. He scoffed. Angry doesn't even begin to cover it. Do you have any idea what it was like growing up thinking you didn't care about us? Thinking you just walked away? I do, I said quietly, and I hate that you had to feel that way, but I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving. I thought I was protecting you. Protecting us? He said, his voice rising. How is abandoning your kids protecting them? Because I didn't want to tear your lives apart, I said, my voice steady. I thought staying would make things worse. I was wrong, Michael. I see that now. But at the time, I didn't know what else to do. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw clenched. Do you even want to be in our lives now? Or are you just here because you feel guilty? I'm here because I love you and your sister, I said. I never stopped loving you, and I want to be here for you, if you'll let me. His expression softened slightly, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he looked down at his coffee, stirring it absently. Mom told us you left because you didn't care, he said after a while. She made you out to be the bad guy. But now, I don't know what to believe. You don't have to decide right now, I said. Take your time. I'll be here when you're ready. He nodded slowly, his walls beginning to crack just a little. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, he said, but I'm willing to try. That's all I can ask, I said. That night, I sat in my small apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. Madison and Michael were willing to let me back into their lives, even if it would take time to rebuild that trust. But I knew the hardest part was still ahead. Emily had spent years poisoning their perception of me, and while I sent them messages every few days, checked in, even sent Michael some job opportunities I'd heard about. Madison responded quickly, though cautiously, but Michael remained distant. I was prepared for the long road ahead. But then Emily called. I hadn't heard her voice in years, and the moment I saw her name flash on my phone, I hesitated. Every instinct told me to ignore it. But something inside me, maybe closure, maybe just morbid curiosity, made me answer. What do you want, Emily? My voice was cold, detached. She sighed. Jonathan, we need to talk. I think we've said everything we needed to. No, she said quickly. Not about us. About the kids. About what happens now. That caught my attention. I stayed silent, waiting. They need stability, she said, her voice measured. You showing up out of nowhere, telling them the truth. It's thrown everything into chaos. And I don't know if you realize it, but they still live with me. I'm still their mother. Anger flared in my chest. You mean the same mother who lied to them their entire lives? She exhaled sharply. Yes, and I regret that. I regret everything. But I was the one who was there when you weren't. And now, suddenly, you want to come back and play the hero? I clenched my jaw. I don't want to be a hero. I want to be their father. She was quiet for a moment. Then, softer, she said, Do you think you can fix this? I frowned. What do you mean? You think telling them the truth changes things? That it suddenly makes them yours again? I stiffened. They were always mine. Were they? She asked, and her voice was no longer filled with venom, just sadness. Jonathan, I messed up. I did terrible things. But for all those years, they loved you because they believed you were their father. Now that they know the truth, do you think they'll ever see you the same way again? Her words were like a dagger. I hated that she was right. I had been so focused on revealing the truth, on exposing her lies, that I hadn't stopped to think about what it would do to the kids. The truth didn't change biology. It didn't rewrite history. It just complicated everything. I don't know, I admitted. For the first time, her voice softened. Then maybe we should figure that out together. I nearly laughed. You want to work together? After everything? She sighed. Not for me. Not for you. For them. I didn't trust her. I never would again. But for Madison and Michael? Maybe she had a point. I'll think about it, I said finally, and I hung up. A week later, I found myself standing outside Madison and Michael's apartment. It was small and run down, but it was theirs. I knocked, and Madison answered. Hey, she said, surprised. Hey, I said, offering a small smile. Can I come in? She nodded, stepping aside. I spotted Michael on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He barely glanced at me. I took a deep breath. I need to say something. Both of you. Michael finally looked up, setting his phone down. I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, I said. About what you found out and what it means for all of us. I met their eyes. The truth is, I don't have all the answers. I don't know how we move forward from this. But I know that I want to. And I know that I love you both, no matter what. Madison blinked rapidly, clearly holding back tears. Michael, as usual, remained unreadable. I can't change what happened, I continued. And I can't change the fact that Jack is your biological father. But I can be here now, if you want me to be. Michael exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. Then, finally, he spoke. I don't know if I can call you Dad right now. His words stung, but I nodded. I understand. But, he added, I do want to know you again. My chest tightened. That's all I could ask for. Madison sniffled, then stood up and hugged me. I don't care about DNA, she whispered. You're still my dad. I held her tightly, my own emotions finally breaking through. For the first time in years, I felt like I was home. Epilogue. A new beginning. Months passed. Slowly, things started to rebuild. I didn't force anything with Michael. I gave him space, but I was there when he was ready. Madison and I grew closer, talking more frequently. Emily and I maintained a cold civility. We would never be friends again, but we had come to an unspoken agreement. The past was the past, and our focus had to be on the kids. As for Jack, I didn't hear from him, and I didn't care to. He had disappeared from all of our lives, just as he had disappeared from Emily's. One day, Michael sent me a text. Hey, want to grab a beer sometime? It was a small thing, but it meant everything. The road ahead wasn't perfect. The scars of betrayal would always be there. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. I had lost everything once. Now, I was getting it back, and that was enough.